The ASV Relentless, a lone human stealth destroyer, stood defiantly against 1,000 Iridian alien battleships, ready to fight to the last in the face of overwhelming odds. Captain James Thompson's eyes narrowed as he watched the massive Iridian fleet emerge from the void on the view screen. James was a grizzled veteran, his face etched with scars from countless battles against the ruthless Iridian Empire in their relentless war to exterminate humanity. "Status report," James barked. "The rest of the fleet is gone, Captain. Destroyed or scattered," First Officer Michael replied grimly. "We're all that stands between the Iridians and the colonies." James's jaw clenched. He knew the stakes. If the Iridians broke through, millions of innocents would be slaughtered without mercy, just like all the other worlds the aliens had already burned in their campaign of extermination. Men, women, children. The Iridians killed them all. James had seen it firsthand, had watched helplessly as the aliens tortured children in front of their parents, as they massacred entire populations and enslaved the survivors. He had vowed, never again, not while he still drew breath. "Sir, we're being hailed by the Iridian flagship," the comms officer reported. "It's Sagan himself." James's blood ran cold. Sagan, the alien ruler, a vicious tyrant, cunning and ruthless beyond imagining, the architect of humanity's destruction. James had clashed with him before. He knew that Sagan would not rest until every last human in the galaxy was dead or in chains. The bridge was silent, every eye on James. They were waiting for his order, his decision: flee and abandon the colonies to their fate, or stay and fight against impossible odds. James looked around at his crew, his brothers and sisters in arms. They were afraid, but he saw something else in their eyes too: determination, resolve. They were ready to lay down their lives for humanity, every last one of them. James made his choice. He would not run. He would not let the Iridians win. If this was to be his final stand, then he would make it one for the ages. One human warship against 1,000 alien battleships. The Relentless against the might of the Iridian Empire. "We fight," James said, his voice like steel. "Power up weapons, prepare for battle. We stand and we fight to the last man if need be. For Earth, for humanity. Let's show these alien bastards what happens when you mess with the human race." The crew roared its assent, and the Relentless turned to face the oncoming armada, the pride of the human fleet ready to fight to the bitter end. "Engage cloaking device," James shouted. The Relentless shimmered and vanished from view, its experimental stealth technology masking the ship from Iridian sensors. It was a desperate gambit, but James knew it was their only chance against the overwhelming enemy force bearing down on them. He had a plan, a bold and reckless one, but he saw no other option. "Set a course for Sagan's flagship," James ordered. "We're going to take that bastard out." The bridge crew exchanged nervous glances, but obeyed without question. They trusted their captain even in the face of almost certain death. The Relentless glided silently through the void, weaving between the Iridian ships undetected as it closed in on its target, the massive dreadnought at the heart of the enemy fleet. As they approached the flagship, James turned to the weapons officer. "Arm the phase cannon." The officer hesitated. "But, sir, it's never been tested. We don't know if—" "I know," James cut him off, "but it's our only shot. Do it." The experimental weapon hummed to life, its power levels rising as it prepared to fire. The Relentless dropped its cloak, appearing from nowhere off the flagship's port bow. Before the Iridians could react, James gave the order. "Fire!" A blinding beam of energy lanced out from the Relentless, piercing the flagship's shields as if they weren't there and boring straight through the hull to the bridge. The phase cannon's aim was true. The shot tore the command center apart, instantly vaporizing Sagan and his top officers in a blast of searing light. The dreadnought reeled, explosions blossoming across its hull as the phase cannon's shot wreaked havoc on its internal systems. Its shields failed, and its weapons fell silent, leaving it crippled and helpless before the Relentless fury. "Hit it with everything we've got," James roared. The Relentless opened up with a full barrage, missiles and beams hammering into the stricken flagship. The dreadnought came apart under the onslaught, massive chunks of debris spinning away as secondary explosions tore through its body. With a final blinding flash, the flagship detonated, the shockwave buffeting the nearby Iridian ships. The enemy fleet fell into disarray, shocked by the sudden loss of their ruler and his ship. James wasted no time in pressing the attack. "Helm, bring us about. Target the nearest battleship." The Relentless wheeled and dove at the closest Iridian vessel, a monstrous ship bristling with weapons. The smaller human destroyer danced around its lumbering foe, peppering it with fire while nimbly evading the answering salvo. The Iridian ship was powerful but slow, unable to match the Relentless speed and agility. The human crew operated like a perfectly calibrated machine, their countless drills and battle experience allowing them to predict and counter the Iridian vessel's every move. Under the relentless hail of fire, the battleship's shields eventually failed, its hull scorched and pitted by countless hits. "Finish it," James said coldly. "Torpedoes, fire!" A volley of torpedoes leapt from the Relentless tubes, corkscrewing through space to slam into the crippled Iridian ship. The battleship vanished in a series of blinding detonations, torn apart by the warheads. Hundreds of Iridian soldiers died in an instant as their ship was reduced to a plume of glowing fragments. The Relentless was already moving, cloaking again as it slipped away from the expanding cloud of debris. It decloaked behind another Iridian ship, raking it with cannon fire before vanishing again. One by one the Relentless struck, using its stealth and maneuverability to surgically pick apart the enemy fleet. But for every ship they destroyed, a dozen more remained. James knew they were still hopelessly outnumbered. He had no illusions that they could win this battle, but he was determined to make the Iridians bleed for every ship and every life. Suddenly, alarms blared on the bridge. "Sir," the sensor officer called out, "I'm detecting multiple enemy signatures breaking off from the main fleet. They're heading for the colonies." James's blood ran cold. He instantly realized what was happening. The Iridians, unable to pin down and destroy the Relentless, were going after easier prey, the defenseless human civilians in the nearby star systems. If those ships reached the colonies, it would be a massacre. Millions would die, slaughtered without mercy by the cruel Iridians. James knew he had to stop them, but he also knew that if he abandoned the battle to defend the colonies, he'd be leaving the Relentless open to attack from the rest of the enemy fleet. An impossible choice: save the colonies but possibly lose his ship and crew, or keep fighting the fleet, but allow the colonies to burn. James looked to Michael, seeing the same awful realization in his first officer's eyes. The decision was James' burden to bear, and he had only seconds to make it. The fate of millions rested on his next words. His mouth was dry as he opened it to give the order. James made the call. "Michael, take a shuttle and a dozen of our best. Get to those colonies now." His first officer nodded grimly and rushed off the bridge. As the shuttle rocketed away from the Relentless, James refocused on the raging battle. Iridian ships swarmed around them, pounding the Relentless's straining shields with relentless fire. The ship shuddered as another volley slammed into the weakening barriers. "Shields at 20%, an officer shouted over the chaos. "We can't take much more of this." James gripped his chair as the deck lurched beneath him. "Reroute all power to weapons and engines. We'll take as many of these bastards with us as we can." Suddenly alarms screeched. "New contact bearing 215, sensors reported." Sir, it's massive, larger than anything we've seen." James's blood ran cold as the behemoth appeared on the view screen. A Iridian dreadnought, dwarfing even Sagan's flagship. He realized instantly this had to be the Empire's ace in the hole, a secret weapon held in reserve until now. The dreadnought's weapons spoke, great lances of energy smashing into the Relentless. Explosions ripped through the ship, consoles detonating in showers of sparks. Smoke poured into the bridge. James was hurled from his chair, head cracking against a bulkhead. He dragged himself up, blood flowing into his eyes from a gash on his brow. "Report!" he bellowed through the smoke. "Shields are gone. Hull breaches on decks 5 through 12, weapons failing across the board. James staggered to the tactical display. The Relentless was reeling, crippled, but not dead. Not yet. "Target the dreadnought," he snarled. "Find me a weak point, a flaw, anything, focus everything we've got left." The Relentless' remaining guns swiveled and fired as one, missiles and beams converging on the massive ship in a desperate salvo. But the dreadnought's shields flickered and held, undaunted. It returned fire, its weapons carving into the Relentless' ravaged hull with brutal ease. "We've lost main engines. Weapons array is offline, life support failing." James slumped against the smoking ruins of a console. So this was it. This was how it ended. On the screen the dreadnought loomed, its guns charging for one final crushing salvo. James prepared to give the order to abandon ship. Better some of his people escape in pods than all die with him. But before he could speak, the sensors officer shouted in sudden disbelief. "New contacts on long-range scanners. Sir, it's Admiral Hackett, the Fifth Fleet." James's eyes widened as a swarm of new signatures appeared on the screen, charging towards the battle. He watched in amazement as the reinforcements slammed into the Iridian ships in a storm of fire, the enemy reeling in shocked disarray at the unexpected attack. The tide had turned in an instant, but too late for the Relentless. The dreadnought bore down on them, guns glowing as they prepared to fire. James knew they had only one chance, one final option. "Helm, set a collision course," he roared. "We're going to ram the bastard." The Relentless leapt forward, drive straining as it hurled itself at the looming dreadnought. James closed his eyes in the final seconds, thinking of his crew, the colonies, the lives he'd sworn to defend. This was the end, but it was an end with meaning. A good death in the service of all he believed in. The Relentless struck the dreadnought head-on. The impact so titanic it seemed the very fabric of space rippled. A sun-bright flash seared James' vision, and then pain. Searing, all-consuming pain was the first thing James felt as consciousness slowly returned. Every nerve ending in his body screamed in agony. His skin felt like it was on fire. He tried to move, to sit up, but his limbs wouldn't respond. Panic gripped him. Was he paralyzed? But no, he could feel the pain, which meant he still had sensation. Slowly, agonizingly, James forced his eyes open. Bright light assaulted his vision, making him squint. He was in some kind of medical bay. That much was clear from the sterile white walls and the beeping machines surrounding him. But how had he gotten here? The last thing he remembered was the Relentless, the battle, the dreadnought, the ramming maneuver. It all came flooding back in a rush of images and sensations. The ship breaking apart around him, the crew screaming as they were sucked out into the void, the blinding flash of the explosion. James had been sure in that moment that he was dead, that no one could possibly survive such destruction. Yet here he was, broken and battered, but somehow, miraculously, alive. A door hissed open, and a figure entered, and a doctor, judging by the white coat. The man approached James's bed, his expression one of amazement and disbelief. "Captain Thompson," he said, shaking his head. "I can hardly believe it. When they pulled you out of that escape pod, we all thought, well, it doesn't matter what we thought. You're alive. That's the important thing." "The crew," James croaked, his throat raw and painful. "Did anyone else?" The doctor's face fell. "I'm sorry, Captain, you were the only one we found. The rest—" He trailed off, but the implication was clear. James was the sole survivor of the ASV Relentless. He had led his crew, his friends, to their deaths. The weight of that realization settled on him like a physical burden, threatening to crush him. "Your injuries were extensive," the doctor continued, checking the readouts on the machines. "Broken bones, internal bleeding, severe concussion. Frankly, it's a miracle you survived at all. But you're stable now, and with time and therapy, you should make a full recovery." James barely heard him. His mind was reeling, trying to process everything that had happened. The Relentless was gone. His crew was gone. But the Iridians, had their sacrifice been in vain? Had they failed to stop the invasion? As if reading his thoughts, the doctor spoke again. You did it, Captain. You stopped them. The Iridian fleet is in ruins, their leadership decimated. When news of your victory spread, it sparked uprisings across the galaxy. The Iridian Empire is crumbling as we speak. You've given us a fighting chance. A fighting chance. The words echoed in James's mind as he slipped back into unconsciousness, his battered body demanding rest. They had a chance now, because of him, because of his crew's sacrifice. And James swore in that moment that he would not let that sacrifice be in vain. No matter what it took, no matter the cost, he would see this fight through to the end. For his crew, for humanity. He would make the Iridians pay. Days turned into weeks as James slowly healed, his body knitting itself back together with the help of the best medical technology humanity had to offer. The doctors were amazed at the speed of his recovery. They said it was like his sheer force of will was accelerating the healing process. James hardly cared about their amazement. All that mattered to him was getting back on his feet, getting back into the fight. As soon as he was able, James was up and about, pushing himself through grueling physical therapy sessions, forcing his weakened muscles to regain their strength. He had to be ready, because he knew the war was far from over. The Iridians were on the ropes, but they were far from defeated. They would strike back and strike back hard. Humanity had to be ready. It was during one of these sessions that Admiral Hackett came to see him. James had served under Hackett for years and respected the man immensely. If Hackett was here, it had to be important. Captain Thompson, Hackett greeted him, his tone somber. It's good to see you up and about. Admiral, James replied, wincing as he straightened up from the weight machine he'd been using. What brings you here? Hackett's expression was grave. I'm afraid I have some bad news. The Iridians have launched a massive counterattack. They've got a new weapon, a dreadnought even more powerful than the one you took down. It's cutting through our defenses like they're made of paper. James felt a chill run down his spine. After everything they'd been through, all the sacrifices they'd made, could it all be for nothing? I need you, James, Hackett said, his voice urgent. The Retribution is ready for you. It's a new ship built specifically to take on this dreadnought. There's no one else I trust to lead this mission. You're our best hope. James hesitated, looking down at his hands. They still shook sometimes, a lingering effect of his injuries. Was he ready for this? Could he lead more good men and women to their potential deaths? But then he remembered his crew, remembered their bravery in the face of certain doom. He remembered the young soldier who had told him of the lives he'd saved, the hope he'd given to the embattled colonies. He had a responsibility, a duty. He couldn't turn his back on that, no matter how much he might want to. I'll do it, he said, meeting Hackett's gaze with steely determination. I'll take command of the Retribution. We'll take that dreadnought down no matter the cost. Hackett nodded, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. I knew I could count on you, James. The ship is waiting for you. Godspeed, Captain. James stood on the bridge of the ASV Retribution, staring out at the looming shape of the Iridian dreadnought on the view screen. It was even more monstrous than the one he had faced before, bristling with weapons and shielded by shimmering energy fields. Status report, he barked, slipping easily back into the role of captain despite his long convalescence. All systems nominal, sir, his tactical officer reported. Weapons charged and ready. But, sir, the enemy ship's defenses are unlike anything we've seen. Our scans can't penetrate them. James frowned, his mind racing. The Iridians had learned from their last encounter, had adapted their technology to counter the tactics that had brought them low before. He would have to outthink them, find a weakness they hadn't anticipated. Bring us in closer, he ordered. Scan for any fluctuations in their shield harmonics, any pattern to their energy output. There has to be a way through. The Retribution surged forward, its own shields flaring as the dreadnought's weapons lashed out at them. The ship shuddered under the onslaught, but held steady. James gripped the arms of his chair, his eyes locked on the readouts in front of him. There, a flicker, a momentary dip in the shield strength near the ship's aft section. It was risky. The Retribution would have to get in close, dangerously close, to exploit it, but it was the only chance they had. "Helm, bring us about!" James shouted over the blare of alarms. "Get us in behind them! Tactical, focus all fire on that shield fluctuation!" The crew leapt to obey, the Retribution swinging up and over the dreadnought in a daring maneuver that brought them within a hair's breadth of the enemy ship's hull. The dreadnought's turrets swiveled to track them, but too slow. The Retribution was already past, its own weapons hammering into the momentarily weakened shields. The dreadnought's defenses held, but James could see they were wavering, the constant barrage taking its toll. They just needed one more push, one more all-out attack to breach those shields and strike at the ship's heart. But the dreadnought wasn't going to give them that chance. It was turning, bringing its full might to bear on the Retribution. They had only seconds before they would be in the firing line of those devastating cannons. James made a split-second decision. "Ready boarding parties," he yelled, already unstrapping himself from his chair. "I'm going over there. We'll take that ship down from the inside if we have to." The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity and controlled chaos. James suited up, checked his weapons, and gathered his strike team. They were the best of the best, each one hand-picked by James for their skills and their unflinching bravery. They knew the odds, knew this was likely a one-way trip, but they didn't hesitate, not for a moment. The strike team boarded the shuttle, rocketing out of the Retribution's hangar bay and angling towards the dreadnought. The enemy ship loomed before them, its hull pitted and scarred from the Retribution's attack, but still terrifyingly imposing. They landed with a jarring thud, the shuttle's clamps latching onto the dreadnought's hull. James was the first one out, his boots clanging on the alien metal as he stepped into the airlock. His team fanned out behind him, weapons at the ready. They met resistance almost immediately, Iridian soldiers pouring into the corridor to block their path. The confined space erupted into a chaotic melee of flashing blades and searing energy beams, the air thick with the stench of ozone and burnt flesh. James fought like a man possessed, his rifle spitting death with every squeeze of the trigger. He could feel his injuries twinging, the not-quite-healed muscles screaming in protest, but he ignored the pain, pushing forward with single-minded determination. They fought their way deeper into the ship, following the schematics James had memorized. The shield generator had to be here somewhere, protected in the very heart of the vessel. If they could take it out, the Retribution could finish the job. But the Iridians were determined to stop them. Every step was bought with blood, every corridor a hard-fought battleground. James's team was whittled down one by one until only a handful remained, but still they pushed on, driven by desperation and the knowledge that failure was not an option. Finally, they reached the shield core. It pulsed with malevolent energy, protected by a shimmering force field and a phalanx of elite Iridian guards. James knew this was their last stand, their final chance. He gave the order to attack, and together they charged forward into the teeth of the enemy's defenses. It was a brutal, bloody affair, a close-quarters slugging match that left the floor slick with gore. James felt the sting of enemy fire, felt his armor crack and his skin blister, but he didn't stop, didn't falter. With a final desperate effort, they broke through. James lunged forward, ignoring the searing pain of a blaster bolt that grazed his side, and slapped the charge onto the shield core. They had seconds, mere moments, before it would detonate. "Fall back," James yelled, his voice cracking with exhaustion and pain. "Back to the shuttle now." They ran, leaping over the bodies of the fallen, stumbling and staggering but never stopping. Behind them, James could hear the Iridians giving chase, could feel the heat of their weapons at his back. They made it to the shuttle with seconds to spare, piling in and slamming the hatch shut. James collapsed into the pilot's seat, his hands shaking as he wrenched the controls, lifting the small craft up and away from the dreadnought. The explosion, when it came, was titanic. The dreadnought's shields failed in a cascading burst of energy, the feedback tearing through the ship's systems. Secondary explosions blossomed across its hull as the core went critical, engulfing the massive vessel in a blinding fireball. The shockwave hit the shuttle like a hammer blow, sending them tumbling end over end. James fought with the controls, trying to stabilize their spin, but it was a losing battle. Alarms blared, the hull groaning under the strain. They were losing power, losing control. With a final shuddering impact, they hit the deck of the Retribution's hangar bay. The shuttle crumpled, the metal shrieking as it tore and buckled. James felt a searing pain lance through his chest, felt something give way inside him with a sickening crunch. Darkness swam at the edges of his vision as he dragged himself from the wreckage, his breath coming in short, agonizing gasps. He could taste blood, could feel it bubbling up his throat. But through the haze of pain, he could see the view screen, could see the shattered remnants of the Iridian dreadnought drifting in the void. They had done it. Against all odds, they had triumphed. The cost had been high, so high, but they had bought humanity a chance to strike back, to reclaim what was theirs. As James finally succumbed to his wounds, slipping into the welcoming embrace of unconsciousness, a smile touched his blood-stained lips. They had won the battle. But the war was only just beginning. As the Iridian armada lay in ruins, smashed by the Retribution's desperate assault, the human colonies erupted in celebration. On a dozen worlds, the downtrodden masses rose up, overthrowing their Iridian overlords in a frenzy of violence and retribution. Iridian governors were dragged from their palaces. Iridian garrisons were overrun by angry mobs armed with little more than rocks and makeshift weapons. News of the uprising spread like wildfire, igniting a spark of hope in the hearts of billions. If one ship, one crew could stand against the might of the Iridian Empire and prevail, then perhaps there was a chance for freedom after all. The name James Thompson became a rallying cry, a symbol of defiance in the face of tyranny. But even as the rebels savored their victories, a new shadow fell across the galaxy. In the depths of Iridian space, a vast armada was gathering, a force unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. Thousands of warships, millions of soldiers, all under the command of a single, terrifying figure. Zoran. Whispers spread of Zoran's origins, of the dark sciences that had birthed him. He was a monster, they said, a soulless creature crafted for a single purpose, to crush the enemies of the Iridian Empire beneath his heel. Where he walked, worlds burned, and populations were slaughtered without mercy. Now this unstoppable force was bearing down on the human colonies, determined to make an example of the upstart rebels. The fledgling resistance scrambled to muster a defense, but they were hopelessly outmatched. Their only hope lay with the Retribution and her battle-hardened crew. James, still recovering from his wounds, received the news with a heavy heart. He had hoped that their sacrifices had bought humanity a future, but it seemed that their struggle was only just beginning. With a grim sense of inevitability, he ordered the Retribution to set course for the front lines once more. As the battered warship limped towards the gathering storm, James couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. The odds they had faced before had been overwhelming, but this felt like a battle they could not hope to win. Zoran's flagship alone, the dreaded Decimator, was said to be an unstoppable juggernaut, its armor impervious to any weapon. But what choice did they have? To run, to hide, would only delay the inevitable. If humanity was to have any chance at all, they had to make a stand here and now, even if it meant their own annihilation. The Retribution rendezvoused with the ragtag rebel fleet on the edge of the Tindari system, where Zoran's armada was expected to emerge from hyperspace. It was a pitiful force, a handful of battered frigates and fighters, crewed by desperate men and women who knew they were likely sailing to their deaths. James looked out at the assembled ships, feeling a surge of pride and sorrow. These were his people, the last of the free humans, and they were ready to lay down their lives for the slimmest chance at victory. He vowed not to let their courage be in vain. The attack, when it came, was as sudden as it was brutal. One moment the stars were empty, the next the void was filled with the looming hulls of Iridian warships, a swarm so vast it seemed to blot out the stars themselves. The rebel ships scattered, trying to evade the incoming fire, but there was nowhere to run. The Iridians' guns spoke, and the darkness was filled with the blooms of dying ships. At the heart of the enemy fleet, the Decimator loomed, a mountain of armor and weaponry that dwarfed even the Retribution. Its guns fired with impunity, each volley claiming another rebel ship in a storm of fire and debris. James gritted his teeth, hands flying over the controls as he wove the Retribution through the chaos. The human ships fought with desperate courage, hammering at the Iridian vessels with everything they had, but it was like throwing pebbles at a tidal wave. One by one, the rebel ships were torn apart, reduced to plumes of flame and shattered metal. The Retribution fought on, dancing around the edges of the battle, striking where it could, but it was only a matter of time. A volley from the Decimator clipped the Retribution's flank, sending the ship spinning. Alarms howled as systems failed across the ship, the hull groaning under the stress. James hauled the ship back under control, but he knew they were finished. The rebel fleet was all but destroyed, and the Retribution was alone against the might of Zoran's armada. In that moment, James made his decision. If this was to be their end, then they would make it an end worthy of remembrance. They would strike one last blow against the heart of their enemy, even if it meant their own destruction. "Set a collision course," James ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "We're going to ram that bastard." The crew hesitated for only a moment before leaping to obey. They knew as well as James did that this was the only way, the only chance to strike a blow that might give the rebellion a flicker of hope. The Retribution surged forward, engines straining as it picked up speed. The Decimator loomed ahead, its guns turning to face this new threat, but too slow. The Retribution was already inside its firing arc, too close for the larger ship to bring its weapons to bear. James watched the Decimator grow larger on the view screen, his heart pounding in his ears. He could feel the ship shaking around him, could hear the screech of overstressed metal as the hull began to buckle and tear. But he did not falter. His eyes remained locked on his target, his hands steady on the controls. He would see this through to the end, no matter the cost. The two ships collided with a force that seemed to shake the very fabric of space. The Retribution, already battered and broken, crumpled like tin foil, its structure disintegrating under the titanic impact. The Decimator's shields flared, struggling to repel the unexpected assault, but even they could not withstand the sheer kinetic force of the collision. For a moment, the two ships seemed to merge, the Retribution burying itself deep into the Decimator's hull. Then with a blinding flash, the Retribution's power core detonated, the explosion tearing through both ships like a hot knife through butter. The Decimator reeled, mortally wounded, secondary explosions rippling across its frame. Massive sections of hull peeled away, venting atmosphere and debris into the void. The mighty warship, the pride of the Iridian fleet, was reduced to a shattered hulk, drifting helplessly in the void. But it was not enough. Even as the Decimator died, the rest of the Iridian fleet closed in, their weapons hammering into the defenseless human colonies with merciless fury. The Retribution's sacrifice had bought the rebels precious minutes, but in the end, it was not enough to turn the tide. The human worlds burned, their cities reduced to ash, their people slaughtered in their billions. The few survivors were rounded up, to be enslaved or exterminated at the Iridians' leisure. The great uprising, which had begun with such hope, was crushed utterly. The dream of freedom snuffed out like a candle in a hurricane. In the end, Zoran stood triumphant, his boot planted firmly on the neck of the galaxy. The Iridian Empire, which had been shaken to its core by the rebellion, emerged stronger than ever, its grip on power absolute and unchallenged. The story of James Thompson and the Retribution passed into legend, a tragic tale of heroism and sacrifice in the face of overwhelming odds. But as the years passed, even this faded, the memory of humanity's last stand lost in the relentless march of time. In the end, the galaxy moved on, the strong preying on the weak, the cycle of oppression and rebellion playing out again and again across the stars. The Iridian Empire endured, a dark beacon of tyranny and cruelty, unchallenged and eternal. And in the cold void of space, the shattered remains of the Retribution drifted, a silent monument to the fallen, a reminder of the price of defiance in a galaxy where hope was little more than a fading dream. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.